We made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey.
Hello everyone and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, the Red Dwarf podcast here on the We Made This podcast network. My name is Kurt North and as always I have two other gentlemen in the cockpit with me. First one being Mark Adams, or Mark and Adams as well. Last week we split him up and we've now got four in the cockpit. But how are we doing, mate?
You wouldn't. I'd be shagging him, wouldn't I? We've established this.
In the waste disposal section.
Well,
anyway,
if that's what you call it, that's exactly where I'd be shagging him. Yes. Also,
hello, and again for the second week, Mr. Matt Latham, my co-host on Yellow Jackets podcast. Just to get that in there, Matt Latham.
Hello, welcome.
How are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. Long time no speak.
Long time and no speak indeed. It's been all 7 days. Well, we know that's not.
It's in 7 minutes.
7 minutes, literally 7 minutes. Yeah. So this week we are looking at Series 6, Episode 6, which is Out of Time. Very, very pivotal episode in Red Dwarf's history. A lot of things to talk about in this one. It was written by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor. The last time that these two will write together.
As a kid, when we had a year and a half, 2 years, I thought that Red Dwarf had finished. We didn't have the internet in 1994, 1995, where you could look and check whether or not a show had been cancelled by their network, as it is. But, you know, we didn't know if the Beeb had cancelled this. We had a fucking cliffhanger, and we never thought it was going to get resolved. And I was absolutely convinced that this was the end of the Red Dwarf run.
Matt, what do you think generally to this episode, then?
This is an episode of television. End of question. Matter of fact, statement. I didn't intend, before I watched it yesterday, to speak quite, not negatively. When I watched it yesterday, I was like watching it and I was quite surprised at how differently I took it as I perhaps did when I was much younger. Or basically when I had podcast hat on. And I think its place in history, the cliffhanger, and the fact that it's a bookend to the second era of the show, I think makes some people forget about the actual episode itself. And when I was watching it, I was like, this episode actually has quite a lot of issues in it and issues with it in terms of plotting and pacing and its general plot in terms of how it's weighted. I was expecting to like this more than I ended up doing, and I was slightly disappointed after watching it. We'll get into reasons why afterwards. But yeah, that's my thing. I was sadly disappointed on my rewatch.
It took me about 2 or 3 watches of this to kind of get back into it. And I know season 7 and season 8 were on the BBC, but in my head, series 1 to 6 is almost like a time capsule of Red Dwarf. And yeah, I know a lot of people will say, 1 to 6 is the best era of Red Dwarf, full stop, and won't give anything beyond this any scope. We're not of that ilk, and I know that there's definitely dropping quality in certain aspects, and there's certainly things that I think will be really interesting to find as we get through the show, especially with Shipwrecked and Comatose, because we're going to start getting to points where some of the people who are actually on this podcast haven't seen episodes. So, fresh perspectives and all that kind of thing.
I think it's just Colin and me, isn't it? Matt, have you seen the rest?
Yes.
Yeah, and Carl has as well.
I've only watched 11 and 12 once, and I keep meaning to buy the DVDs because I really want to rewatch them before I rewatch them again.
12, if I'm being honest, without colouring it, 12 I really struggle to remember, even though I've watched it maybe twice. Because 11 and 12, there was a bit of a gap in there as well, and they were filmed back to back. That I remember a lot of 11, but I don't remember as much about 12.
I really liked a lot of 10.
I love 10.
10, yeah. Again, I can remember there being a lot of apprehension, particularly after Back to Earth, going, and then I think Trojan appears, and Trojan has perhaps my favourite extended piece of any of the Red Dwarfs.
I would agree, and I can't wait for people to catch up and see that.
I think Kurt knows exactly which bit I'm on about. But yeah, there's like saw that and it's like, yeah, we're in safe hands again. But
I'll be honest, that's why I didn't bother. Is because Back to Earth was so shit. I just was like, well, if that was shit, it's not going to get any better. And I know that really isn't the case because there's some good stuff out there. I know there is.
yeah, I mean, I've only got 2 episodes in, but if I had that logic, I wouldn't be watching Dexter New Blood because the last episode of Dexter season 8 is one of the worst pieces of shit for a finale I've ever seen.
You're not subtle about that, are you?
Yeah, and I know he isn't. But it is interesting, isn't it? Because, as I said about this time capsule moment, that, this is like the epitome of Red Dwarf. There is plenty to talk about going in the future. And, and it's telling that this is the breakup of the partnership. So I think there's a lot that's going on here. We don't see things for 3 years. There's 2 books that come out which kind of contradict each other in the pursuing years before any Red Dwarf 7 comes out. Red Dwarf 7 goes in a completely different direction because Doug does want to do things differently. And there is even now, like the Promised Land, there's people that, have opinions on that. So there's a lot to go about, but this is the final element of the era 1 to 6 era of Red Dwarf. I think that's what I kind of meant at the top of the hour. So, Mark, what do you think? Go on. Sorry, Matt. Go on.
I always think that they group 1 to 6 as an era. I always think 3 and 6 is separate eras to 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Because there's a massive jump in quality. Well, I say quality, jump in production quality. And then you've got Crichton, you've got Hattie Haybridge appearing. So you lose Norman Lovett. And I always think there's I think some people who probably grew up with it probably had 1 to 6 quite close to each other, and without the 3-year gap between 7. But I don't know, I've always grouped 1 and 2 as its own kind of unique capsule. Then 3 and 6 is its own thing. 7 and 8 is their own kind of.
You see, 7 and 8, I would say it's a separate entities.
Yeah,
I would. I think I'd group 1 and 6 together because that was my experience of watching them on VHS tapes. Like I've talked to previously, I don't even know whether I think I watched series 5 and 6 live as well. But I think the previous 4 series, my only experience was on video. And because I had all of those videos, that is how I grouped them. Whereas 7 arrived, I was kind of over Red Dwarf. I'd almost mourned it because, like I say, the cliffhanger and the ending of episode 6, which we're looking at today, I had almost got over Red Dwarf. So I only watched series 7 a couple of times. It wasn't as funny. And series 8, if my memory serves, was a little bit better and a little bit funnier. But again, I think I'd put them into 1 to 6, 7 and 8, and then the Dave stuff would be the eras I would put. But I do also think that there is some strength in Matt's argument as well to split out series 1 and 2 because of exactly the reasons you cited.
Yeah, production. So yeah, it's certainly it's interesting. I mean, it's Red Dwarf in that way is a really interesting show, isn't it? The fact that it does have these separations as such.
I think the only argument is between, is it series 1 to 6 or is series 1 and 2 and 3 to 6? I don't think the other 2 eras are really disputed. Unless you go in for BBC and Dave, 1 to 8, and then the rest, perhaps.
Yeah, well, that wasn't a conversation I wasn't expecting to go down, but a good one anyway.
It's the right point to have that conversation.
It's absolutely the right time to have it, yeah.
Even as the podcasts, this feels like the end of an era, maybe because we've kind of struggled to get Series 6 recorded. We're a bit like Red Dwarf itself, we had a bit of a problem with our staff.
But strangely enough, with Series 6, we've behind the scenes we've recorded this 3 weekdays in a row on the same weekday every single Monday for 3 weeks off the back of it. We've never done that before. We've never been that consistent with recordings.
No,
I mean, I've been absolutely fucked at work the following day. And I've got meetings on Tuesdays, which is fantastic. Love it. But yeah, so there is an element to that we're getting through. I mean, we've always recorded 2 back to back, but The fact that we're actually consistent with this one and getting them through and done.
We're going to do our best not to have as much of a hiatus as Red Dwarf has, although we did kind of nearly have that between series 5 and 6.
We did. Yeah, we just.
It wasn't really a hiatus though, because many specials, and we've got all the specials in the world to carry on with.
We have, and we've got a lot of new characters to appear if Matt's got his way. Out of Time. What are your thoughts on it? You were a bit disappointed with Rimmerworld last week. What are your thoughts on Out of Time? It seems that Matt's had an interesting viewing of this episode. What about you?
I'll be honest, I almost wish that Series 6, now I've come back to it, was 5 episodes and it didn't have Rimmerworld. I liked this as much as everything other than Gunman of the Apocalypse in this series. I thought it was very strong. And then obviously Gunman of the Apocalypse is the best thing ever. But I feel like Rimmerworld tarnishes the other 5. And this is, whilst not Gunman of the Apocalypse, I think it's still a really strong episode. So I'm fascinated to have a discussion with Matt about what he doesn't like about it.
Okay.
Well, let's go and do that now then. I don't think I mentioned it, but I'll mention it again just in case. It was aired on the 11th of November 1993. We start with Rimmer asking to be basically morale officer. And again, I'll talk about Smeg Up straight off the bat, that this is one of the ones that I do remember, with him saying that and him getting it wrong. I don't know about you, but I have definitely had this happen to me before, where somebody either sets up a meeting or arranges something and thinks it's a very good idea, but the actual reason for it is because they're a narcissistic bastard and just want to hear themselves talk.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to say any names, but yes. Shitterbrick, yes. Ugh.
What about you, Matt?
No comment.
No comment. Maybe we should start a podcast about it.
The thing about morale officer, it did make me think that maybe we need some kind of supervision for our podcast. And I thought we could go for gammon appeaser or swear word monitor to make sure that, oh my goodness, we can't say and we can't be woke, because that would be a terrible thing. Oh, quite.
The bonus of being on the main episodes is that I have the censor button.
You do. I've said it again. I've said it 100 times, but the idea that people see that it says explicit on the podcast itself, we make that very clear.
We do.
And then complain about swear words. You can.
Yes.
And the idea that we're not allowed.
We also had this discussion early in these episodes where I said, there is that, but then there's the Christmas special, which if you had a word count on the Christmas special, it was up there. It was very, very much up there.
I did say.
Even I was like going, the little bastards.
The whole pettiness thing really kind of struck a chord, because we've experienced some pettiness with, frankly, idiots that have attacked the podcast for things that we never, ever claimed to not be. So this, for some reason, giving yourself a silly name really kind of struck a chord with me and made me think about that. That's all.
But then again, though, it just reminded me of Neelix.
Neelix from Star Trek?
Yeah, morale officer of Voyager.
Oh, okay.
Of course he was. But he wasn't a bellend. He was actually quite sweet as the morale officer, wasn't he?
If he was, like, I'm not going to get into too much of it, but he was technically dating a 2-year-old.
You see, for me, with the... well...
That was an interesting storyline that I was ill-advised, and yeah. If people haven't seen fucking Voyager, they have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Essentially, the woman he was dating had a 18-year lifespan.
7.
So by the time she was like 2 or 3, she was a fully fledged adult. And he wasn't of that time scale and was dating her. I don't think science fiction would touch that now. Why are we talking about Voyager?
Pass. I was just talking about morale officer. Now, also on that, bearing in mind that, the fact that morale officer, or what I've had in the past is people who see something that isn't their natural attribute, and head towards it because they feel that's the travel direction. So they just see the thing that's happening and jump on board that ship, because if they jump aboard that ship before everyone else, they won't get caught and get drowned. And a lot of people I've seen do that. So, but for Rimmer, obviously, he's looking at the fact that he just wants to like have a go. It's another like bunky kind of scene. The bunks, and we haven't really talked about this, but the new table. We've talked about the different sections of the ship in the past over this series. We have the kitchen, we've got the table, and we've got the cockpit. But the table's acting very much like the bunk scene, isn't it? Really, with all of them.
Yeah, and I guess that resonates with me because as a student, that was where you would go if you wanted a conversation. You would go to the communal area, the little dining room, and they can leave if they want to, and they do, like Rimmer does at the end of this scene. And yeah, that feels more natural than the bunks to me personally, because I've never shared a room with anyone.
Well, I think with the bunk scenes, what you've got is the way the episodes were set up during the first era of the show with the series 1 and 2, was that you had Craig Charles and Chris Barry just set up, have a conversation for about a third, half the episode, setting up this like having the bouncing off of each other, and then you'd have the premise of the episode kick in, and the rest of the episode would be paying off all these things that were setting up in that first bunk scene between the two of them, because like the genesis of like comedy is just two clashing characters bouncing off each other, and that's one of the things that I think slightly missing in the second era of Red Dwarf, in that those bunk scenes slightly less. You get some of it in Marooned, where like it's an excuse to get Chris Barry and Craig Charles together as characters in one, like a bottle episode, so to speak. There's not been that kind of setting up or kind of interaction in that same kind of way in series 6, I think, or and I think the kind of like table bit doesn't seem to really, and this is one of the first issues I got with the episode, is that the scene that happens with the morale officer, it doesn't feel like it's thematically linked with the rest of the episode. Whereas again, early episodes, it would, where you just have them talking about stuff that will pay off later on. Here, it just seems a way of having Rimmer just be rimmery, to use a word that I really like.
So if you use the Friends analogy, then, so like you've got Chandler and Joey's apartment, and then you've got Central Perk. The Central Perk stuff is them just chilling out round the table and just generally talking. Mm-hmm. Whereas like the stuff that's happening in the apartment is more personal, isn't it? So the fact that this is more communal compared to the bunk scenes, which are more like give you more of an you're naturally going to think subconsciously that it's more of a personal space, whereas like this is more of a communal space.
I think there's some truth in what you say, Matt. I think this could have been on a different show. One of those completely irrelevant, but we've got some space to fill cold opens. So it's just thematic and it's got the characters right, but there's no real bearing on the show. Put it as a cold open before the episode, and then have the episode that's run short after that.
Yeah,
that has been done on shows before.
Yeah, there's the Mike Schur, Greg Daniels way of doing it. So you have The Office, Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Their cold opens are always kind of like separate entities. Yeah. Separate entities. So like it's like slice of life type things that are kind of So for example, Brooklyn Nine-Nine is always kind of them just mucking about in the station. Parks and Rec is like the same thing. The Office famously is also just basically majority of the time pranks that Jim plays on Dwight. They're always kind of like separate kind of isolated scenes that are there just to show the grander scheme of the life in that area. Whereas Red Dwarf, we've never really had that before, and
you're right.
Don't know
there hasn't been any padding in Red Dwarf before, and this is padding, but it's funny padding. I don't see why you've got an issue with it.
Yeah, but in the past, padding's always been relevant. They've always got like points to these kind of scenes. Anything that goes on this long in previous episodes or previous series still will eventually lead to a payoff, I think, in terms of. I mean, the only other one I can kind of think of that might be padding, the cold open style padding, is perhaps the introduction to Backwards. Although my defense on that would be it's reintroducing the character of Crichton and its relation to Rimmer, and that has like a narrative kind of reason, or you can justifiably have that in terms of the narrative of Backwards, because you're just going to you're reintroducing this character who's only been in it for one episode previously. Whereas here, it feels separate and it's real estate.
But does it though? Because I mean, he's talking about we're setting Rimmer up to be at the moment where he is right now to where he ends up. Because if he's talking about being a morale officer, that, you know, and the kind of take him like as a joke. So the fact that at the very end he saves the day, even though we're not quite sure what happens at that point, but the very nature that you know, the way the list is giggling, and he calls him a cheeky gerbil, a cheeky gerbil, that, you know, and then Kat's saying about how he's always tense and stuff like that. Is that not just like scene setting for the end of the final act?
I'll buy that.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, I think you're right.
Tenuous, but I'll buy it.
Yeah, I'll allow it.
You allow it? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'll allow
I'm
it.
the host here. Thanks very much.
So, gerbil-faced optimism is my quotable dwarf of the day. I love that. I say that, you know, so I'm a cynical old queen. I used to be gerbil-faced optimist, but life is hard. And anyone who is young and has what I see as what I used to have, rather than my grim fucking cynicism, I describe as gerbil-faced optimism. And honestly, at one point there were like 2 or 3 episodes, maybe series 4, series 5, where there wasn't a quotable dwarf. But series 6, shit a brick. It's just everywhere.
Is that because you think because it's more gag based than the previous seasons or series?
I think it's that, but I also think it's because I've watched series 6 more than anything else of Red Dwarf.
Yeah, I think, and it's probably similar to the point I was making, that it seems more dialogue, punchline based than situation based. So I think it's that kind of thing's there. I mean, and it's quite funny. I still have kind of issues with the way the stories are set up.
You see, my quotable dwarf is Cat going, and I'm not talking styrofoam. I'm talking. No, what am I talking?
But that's a smeg up.
Exactly. So my quotable dwarf for series 6 are smeg ups.
You're true.
You know, it says, "Do I have my permission? Do you have my our permission to poo myself, sir?" You know, stuff like that. That is series 6 is Red Dwarf smeg ups for me. And I know that Matt has only just seen smeg ups. He might have seen smeg outs as well, because he might have done some extra research he didn't need to. But yeah, I mean, coming at it from a fresh pair of eyes, you know, it's amazing that I'm on a completely different spectrum to Matt in that regard, because I instantly see smeg ups everywhere in this series. It's just been incredible that I've had to bite my tongue so many times. And yes, I've maybe done one too many on certain episodes, but I've had to bite my tongue so many times because that's all I ever think about.
I do think you say that with this Megas stuff. My favourite parts of the bottom lives are the ones where it goes wrong and they have to improvise.
Right.
Yeah. And to be fair, quotable bottom, which is a phrase I never thought I'd say, is
I think
it's like a fart, isn't it?
Yeah, bottoms came up again, hasn't it? So
yeah, quotable bottom. For example, it could be technically it's mega, but it's like there's a bit in the first one where they mess up and it's like for ages, and then Aid Emerson goes, "Hell, a line from the play."
My only quotable bottom live, and I don't know why. I think it's only because we might have had it on cassette tape, me and my friend, was the whole scene with like the £1,000 tax bill, and then it's like the poison in the cup of tea, and then Aid goes, "Cup of tea." And I used to say that all the time. Cup of tea.
Cup of tea.
Cup of tea.
Cup of tea.
So here's the thing about bottom. If we weren't doing a Red Dwarf podcast, Bottom would have been the other sitcom that my brother and I, the whole reason I want to do this podcast is it gives me nostalgia about watching Red Dwarf with my brother and just days on end, just getting those VHSs in the video. The other one that we did that with was Bottom, but there is a very successful, very well done, exceptionally well known Bottom podcast, so we're not doing it.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Anyway, we're not off the first scene. But
No.
something I picked up on this watch as well, which is a bit of continuity for later in the show, as in like Red Dwarf, is when they start talking about his nostril hair with tongs.
Yes.
They come back to that in a later season.
It's Series 7 because on Series 7's opening credits, there is actually him using tongs to pluck his nostril hairs.
Yeah.
And I remember that because if you've ever plucked your nostril hairs, ow.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
You pretty much go into stasis, don't you, for a few seconds?
Just never underestimate the vanity of a mid-40s homosexual. But the fucking pain that one has to go through for that particular vanity, it's still worth it.
What do you make? I know this is slightly off topic, but what do you make of the episode with the pan-dimensional liquid beast from the Mogadon cluster?
You just wanted to say that.
Is that not an episode you'd love to see, though?
Oh, yeah. That should have been something that they did in this magazines, but I think this magazines was dead by this point.
We're on autopilot hits. The alert kind of comes up on the autopilot saying that it needs to go to the ops deck. And we see that we've got some of these stellar fog aspirations and unreality pockets that are starting to hit them. Now, in the behind the scenes, they've always wanted to do an episode where Lister was an android, and it eventually just ended up in this scene as such. The Crichton's discussion in this scene, when he realizes that that Lister is a subordinate to him. How did that come across for you, Matt?
Again, I don't want to get too spoilery. There are elements of how this episode is structured that are echoed in the Promised Land.
Yeah.
There are parts of the Promised Land which feels like they had a load of ideas for series 13 that they condensed into that 90-minute special. And with this story, it feels like a subplot that they finish like halfway through the episode before going on to a separate episode later on. I can't think of any reason that this would have any impact on the main plot of the episode, with the time travel a bit later on, but as well as padding for time. And there are bits of it now. There are bits in it that are funny. There are some really funny gags in this storyline, that this mini plot bring up, and there's quite a few great Crichton lines. And I actually paused the DVD yesterday to laugh at the reveal of the little chocolate finger house. So I think that's amazing. But
it is wonderful.
Yeah, it's a wonderful gag, but I think it's wasted in the fact that it becomes irrelevant halfway through the episode when the time travel aspect gets introduced. So there's an element to it that just feels padding and just could be a separate episode on its own. I can't think of any reason why it would be in this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I alluded to it there. I mean, the idea, it does feel like it could be an episode, like, because they even said that they wanted to do this, and they thought this would actually feature in here because of the unreality pocket thing. I mean, did you take anything from that, Mark? Then in that sense, or
so? I think there is some truth in what Matt says, that there is an element of like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, because there wasn't quite enough in the plots to get them where they wanted to with the time drive and the cliffhanger that they clearly wanted to do.
Well, the cliffhanger they didn't actually want to do, but we'll come back to that.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any problem with it. You've watched a lot of sitcoms where it's almost split into 2-3 segments, 2-3 segment plot lines. And I really, really like the reality minefields as a concept. I think that was great fun and everything about it was great.
Yeah, okay, so it's a great concept, but let's talk about The Simpsons for a second, where I think The Simpsons is like a show like Mark, as Mark said, that feels like there's two different plot lines. But with The Simpsons, what usually happens is that the first kind of first one and a half acts of an episode feels completely different to the main plot, but the main plot is always of a consequence of what happens in the first one. Now,
Yeah.
the Lister is an android is a consequence of the reality pockets, rather than Lister being an android is a key factor in how they end up doing time travel. It's not. It's a consequence of the reality pockets. It doesn't really lead into the main plot of the episode, if you get what I mean.
I kind of get what you mean. So, say, for example, if I was to go down that route and criticise this episode for anything, the idea of the stellar fog and the unreality pockets and the disturbances and keeping people on their toes, and because you're going to get something that's big, right? And Red Dwarf isn't this. It's not going to do, a big crescendo towards the end. What we basically get is a device, a time drive, which we've seen the likes of in various different episodes over the course. I think it's not like we get through it and then there's this massive change, or there's something absolutely incredible that happens there. So the very nature of these unreality pockets is meant to give you the promise, the weight of when we get through it, we'll get through it, and there's something there. The time drive for me doesn't really hit with that, because the time drive's just we've got another device that does this. And Red Dwarf, as I say, is like that. That's the point of Red Dwarf. But the way that they circumvent that is quite easy. The way they kind of get through to that, and then we get, as you say, through to that time element thing. There is, for me, that's probably more, from my perspective, is the problem with it. Whereas I can see what you're saying. You need to have, within the morale officer stuff and this, it would be better if it was the unreality pockets hit Rimmer more than it would do Lister, because something that would happen to Rimmer in an unreality pocket would then have consequences for his final hero moment at the end.
Yeah.
So I can see where you're coming from with that.
I think as a device, it was essentially designed for, we've got these scenes that we want to do. We've got these smaller plots, these smaller ideas that we've got some funny gags for. What we'll do is we'll put 3 or 4 or 5 of them in an episode and use this as the way of being able to facilitate that. And I think it's great. It means that we're seeing some funny shit that we may never have seen without the concepts of these reality bubbles.
But I think the show's proven that it's capable of being able to sustain comedic ideas over a central plot. And I do think this feels like a detriment to it at times. And it's slightly disappointing. I think it's slightly disappointing that we know the show is kind of better at being able to structure a singular plot around these comedic ideas.
We've had this problem before with the Toffee Crisp thing, didn't we? In previous series, where it was there was almost a full first third of the episode where the Toffee Crisp suddenly appeared with the self-destruct, and then we kind of switched over.
I bloody loved that gag.
Yeah, it's a great gag, but what we talked about the episode was it kind of swerved and went a different way. And I think there's an element of that in this episode. I definitely think that, yeah.
And I've got no problem with that.
That's fine. I don't have a problem with it.
I do, so yeah.
So what I like about these is that they get slowly, as the plot says, they become more frequent as they go through the minefield, and each of the set pieces becomes shorter and shorter. I think that had some thought in it.
Yeah. The editing of that, yeah.
And the keeping our heads gag, I howled with laughter. That was wonderful. And those masks were really cool for a 5-second gag as well.
So what were they? What do you think they were? What heads?
There was a wolf. There was
A moose.
Are they from some kind of telly program? You're going to tell me they
I'm just
borrowed them
wondering.
from something.
I just had this thought like yesterday of like, are they meant to like represent something with them? But it looks like they're just random heads. There's like, as you say, a moose, a wolf.
I hadn't thought about it. I just laughed because they all had funny animal heads in it.
It's a moose.
Maybe I need to watch it back again, pause that and go, right, so the cat is a wolf. Is that a reference to the fact that in the alternative reality where Lister got pregnant, that there was the dog? No, I don't think we need to do that, actually.
No?
I think there were just some funny heads.
Okay. Just one thing which I picked out, just going back a little bit to when Lister was the android, is it seems that like the likes of Rimmer and Cat both weren't buying it either. And this is before we realised the reality pocket. They're both like, Rimmer's like, I'm not buying this. Cat was like, something doesn't smell right. Which I thought was an interesting element to it. The fact that they were kind of on the same page.
I think it's more of a comment on Crichton's gullibility, because out of the four of them, he is the most gullible.
Mm-hmm.
Even, well, the cat started as the most gullible, but I think it's kind of balanced as they've gone along, as the cat's got more street smart and Crichton has stayed consistently gullible. But perhaps there's also an element of something similar to Sirens, where it's a specific pocket that's designed to pick on a certain member of the crew, something that they would be more easily convinced by. Shit, that's another comparison, like you were saying, Matt, where they've run out of ideas. It's the same as something in the same fucking episode, if that's the case.
Yeah.
And he's got a head like a formation of mashed potato.
Yeah.
This is one of the shots where I think there were... I actually read a bit on Tongue Tied. That's not where I got my information from for this episode about the series as a whole having tight schedules. So I'm not quite sure where some of the actual prompts were put. I think there were some in certain episodes, but it's directly referenced in Tongue Tied here that they were reading off prompts. And some of them were being written as they were actually sort of things. So
you can really tell in some of the scenes as well, where they happen to be in the cockpit and they have a screen in front of them, and they must have programmed them, because Robert Llewellyn doesn't look up for like 20 seconds in one scene. He's just staring at the console because that's where his lines are.
Slightly changing the subject back to the robot bit. This is probably more to Kurt than perhaps Mark. There's a bit of conversations here that reminded me a lot of Blade Runner.
Right.
In terms of the nature of human and robot, you might as well just be talking about replicants. And part of me was thinking there, going like, part of me was thinking that they've got ideas here that they've been influenced by Blade Runner, and I'm wondering whether, at least from in 1993, they had ideas that would eventually play out in Back to Earth.
Yeah, it's Blade Runner it's 11 years old at this point, so I can imagine it's obviously a Doug thing, isn't it? So the fact that that they are starting to talk about that. I mean, they talk about nature, reality, and things like that, and I think the hierarchy is something that they tend to talk a lot about as well. Especially the fact that, as I say, Crichton is subordinate to them. But yeah, that's something I didn't take away from it. But that's definitely worth thinking about that, because it is something that you know, as you say, will
they will dip into that.
Yeah,
I'm trying not to do much spoilers in terms of Back to Earth to try and save Mark from being spoilt on. No, you've watched Back to Earth.
I've watched Back to Earth, and that's where I stopped because it was shit.
Okay, so you have watched Back to Earth.
Have you watched Blade Runner?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Fantastic film.
In that case, then there are a bit elements, because Back to Earth leans far too heavily on the Blade Runner
It's
references.
Blade Runner, isn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, well, let's just do the Back to Earth coverage now. The funniest part of it is the Munchkins.
No, it's not. The funniest bit's when he pushes her in front of the thing into the bus. I'm wondering it just feels quite interesting that they would kind of like either I was just reading too much into what might be Blade Runner reference, but there's definitely Blade Runner in that conversation about where Lister's like saying, but where there's like an existential crisis, and he like basically turns into Roy Batty at one point. The box in the pub in Liverpool.
Yeah.
Is this the first time we've heard you, or did it come up before?
See, that's what I was going to ask. I don't think it's come up before. The Agba Farms, you're thinking of, aren't you? So,
Well, it did, but it was in the episode that they cut, the one called Dad, which we have already covered.
yeah.
Okay.
That was recycled from that, which was a direct sequel to Parallel Universe, which was supposed to open Series 3.
Yeah.
But that gag has been recycled into here.
Okay.
I mean, this probably is a good thing to think about now, because Doug seems to be, obviously we're only speculating, but it seems to me that Doug's interested in story elements and like setting out paths for people.
In arcs. And
Yeah, and Rob seems to be like the gag person. I mean, you kind of see it. I mean, even in Into the Gloop, when we saw it at Hollyhop, that you get an idea of where Rob Grant's Red Dwarf is and where Doug's is.
But with that, there's that nice little thing. On this boxer, did you say kit or paint before assembly? And I held at that.
Yeah.
That's a good gag.
So another thing that happens in here that I would like to mention, because it comes back shortly. Well, I mentioned it in both. So during that scene when they're talking about Lister being an android, there's a moment, and it's one of my, I don't know why I love it so much, when Crichton starts to like sort of tap his chest. And he sort of does that, just kind of like says, "Do you remember my parents?" You know, and so, "Do you remember your parents?" And he kind of just taps his chest like this, and it comes back into play when he goes, "Well, in Reality Pocket, where Mr. Lister," and he slows down, and then he goes, "Oh my," and then he taps his chest again. And
It's wonderful.
the way he taps his chest, for some reason, I absolutely howl. I just think it's just a minutiae element to like Crichton's thing, but it's just the way he's like, "Oh my."
And then that's when the house appeared, the finger house appears.
Yeah. I'm not pleased with it. I'm going to take it back.
I would love someone to make that for me. But I think I'd probably kind of face dive into it.
But when was the last time you used a set square, Mark? That's what I want to ask you.
When I was laying a carpet in my own flat about 12 years ago. There you go. I have actually used a set square.
Well, amazing.
I didn't do a terrible job. I did a acceptable job of laying carpet tiles in a flat. It didn't look shit, but it wasn't perfect.
Oh, have you used a set square, Matt?
In my design technology lessons at school.
Yeah, that's probably about me as well.
Yeah.
Crichton then goes, "I've got gussets to scrub."
I really feel like this is Robert Llewellyn's episode. My memory of it wasn't that. My memory was that it was just kind of drama about getting to that cliffhanger and Rimmer's real kind of bravery at the end. But fuck me, all these reality pockets really do kind of end up with Crichton getting the lion's share of the gags. And I wonder whether it was deliberate or it was just coincidence, because of my theory that this is all smaller ideas that they couldn't fit into an episode and they put them into these reality pockets. They just happen to be Crichton heavy.
Maybe. Did you catch the, just change in character, did you catch the cat double word?
Unforgettable.
Unforgettable. Yeah.
I say that all the time.
Yeah, is it one of yours? Right?
That is my another quotable dwarf. If I want to say that I'm unforgettable, I will say I'm unforgettable. And not very many people clock it, and they just think I'm a bit of a weirdo.
Yeah.
However, I have had Red Dwarf, so it's kind of unforgettable.
I always remember that there was somebody. I was at my work, and there was this guy coming down the stairs, and he was wearing a Ace Rimmer t-shirt, and I was like, "You're my kind." You know, because just seeing out in the wild, it's like I see someone with something. It's great.
What's that film? Is it called Freaks? One of us, one of us, one of us.
Cat gets forgotten, and one of my favourite moments of this episode is we're getting buffeting because it's just again, that's the build up. It's one of those jokes where it builds up, where you start off with the fact that no one sees him, that and it's the way it says things like the writing's really, really strong here. It's like, how can we still remember him? Remember who? I don't remember.
We're going through a reality bubble and there's nothing wrong. It's great.
Yeah.
And the cadence, I think the cadence works in that. I think it's delivered perfectly in a good cadence, good timing. And then just when he starts shaking Lister, he's just going, I'm getting buffeting. It's the way he says it. It's the way he says it.
And even afterwards, what are you doing?
You can see me.
Oh man, brilliant. So they decide this is enough is enough. Enough is enough, and we're going to go back to the first episode of this series, and we're going to go back to the cryostasis chambers. They could have spent 3 days in this unreality pockets, and it's just not going to work. So they get put in there to get through. So we end up at the space station. It's a derelict 28th century, and it is time travel capable. Apparently, they went back to the 20th century where they were infected with an influenza virus. That's what he was saying there.
Which is a contradiction, because in the 20th century, that station wouldn't have been in the same spot, and it doesn't travel in space as well as time, except it does in Ticket to Ride.
But the drive might have failed because it was the maiden voyage. Apparently, it's been on autopilot as well. And it has been 3 million years.
You think it's kind of travelled away from Earth and landed where they found it?
Potentially, yeah.
All right, I'll buy that. So
they're going to. The plan is to board it, strip out the time drive machine, and then we get one of my favourite moments of Red Dwarf's history. Because, and I've noticed this in this series, they've taken the smeg out of Star Trek a couple of times, but really nuanced version of it. And this is perfect because Star Trek does this a lot, where they go back in time, but they go back in time and they're at Earth. There may well be
yes.
So Time's Arrow, Next Generation, we end up going back to 19th century Earth.
Future's End in Voyager.
Yeah. So they always kind of do that. But the way that they've done this with where we've got the time machine, let's go back to the 1420s. Kat obviously says, I don't know, I just wanted to prove that you were listening. I was listening kind of thing. They miss it by a day. Now, isn't that Back to the Future, isn't it? Because Back to the Future's missed days out by a day, isn't it? Or did they actually land on the day?
I can't
Missing
remember.
it by a certain amount of time is very Doctor Who as well. That happens a lot, that you don't quite hit what you were going for.
Well, Matt
with the TARDIS.
Smith was terrible.
But with
Amy Pond,
60s, 70s, 80s stuff too.
She went through torture with Matt Smith's Doctor because it was you've got a week's passed, 2 years have passed. Yeah, but anyway, so yes, it's a day out, and it's 1422. Kat says, "No, let's try 1421," and it's where it's just, I don't get it. We're still where we were, and as you say with Crichton, of course, it's a matter of fact.
Yes.
It's and it's similar to last week's with the whole teleport thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of joke.
It's not just the fact that he says, "Well, yes." It's his kind of pleasant smile afterwards as well.
We're still in deep space, sir. Only now we're in deep space in the 15th century. Isn't it wonderful?
And it's just a lovely little kind of pleasant, unironic smile that he hasn't clocked that what they're annoyed at. It's lovely.
But even say we're still 3 million away from Earth. Well, yes.
Well, yeah.
We're moving space. To get a time travel device that they can't use.
It's definitely Crichton's episode. It is definitely Crichton's episode. This, and like I said, my memory didn't have it down as such.
Yeah, and as I said, the Star Trek thing for me is just wonderful because it's it is so assumed. Because I think it's almost from a science fiction point of view, a Star Trek point of view, that you almost programmed to think, all right, we're going back to the 20th century, or we're going back to the 15th century, like this one is. And what they're going to do? How is this going to turn out? And it's literally nothing. And I just love that juxtaposition of like your expectations to where it actually is.
It's funny, which is important, but it is such a delicious sideswipe as well.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful combination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they need an FTL drive, which would make sure that they can go anywhere and anywhen.
They find one in Tika to Ride. Have you spotted something that's a bit of a fucking bugbear to me?
Maybe something in
The fact that
Ticket to
they
Ride.
just don't fucking explain it. And the whole concept of this episode, this really important, pivotal episode where Red Dwarf gets destroyed, is that they can't travel in time and space. They can only travel in time. And then at the start of Ticket to Ride, they just travel in time and space with no explanation.
Did they go to
Yes, it's a
1963
fucking
on Earth
bugbear.
by any chance?
Yes, they do.
Yes.
But we'll talk about that when we look at Tika to Ride. But it really fucking pissed me off.
Do you know the only thing that's good about sort of well the recent like sort of renaissance? I've watched some of the Oliver Stone JFK documentary. I haven't watched it all yet. Is that one of the wordles recently was null?
Yes, it was.
I was like, right, that one. And loads of people were struggling with that word. I was like, that's null. Got that. I know that.
I got that in 4. It was a
Right.
bit of a bad day for me. I like it if I get it in 3. I got null in 4.
We're definitely aging the podcast
This is not
now.
going to... We are, because probably people won't be playing Wordle then.
I found Wordle archive now. So I started like in 200s. I've started from 1 now. I've gone back.
Oh, didn't realise that was a thing.
Yeah, there's a
can
Wordle
you do
archive.
that?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Matt's typing in.
I might have a little go at that.
Yeah, I was like falling asleep the other day and I almost like lost it because I was like, oh, I'm too tired. Why am I doing this now? I can't concentrate. Anyway, let's move on. So TV Weather Girl gets mentioned again. They seem to be, obsessed with TV Weather Girls.
Of all the jokes, that really dates it.
Yeah.
TV Weather Girls were much more famous and in popular culture at this time. And I couldn't name you anyone who does the weather now, whereas at the time, maybe not the Weather Girls, but I could have named John Ketley, Michael Fish, a few others. I couldn't name you a weather person now.
I don't watch the weather.
There you go. Well, but it's not in popular culture really anymore, is it?
Oh,
You
it's
just
not,
look at
'cause
it on your phone.
There's not much in terms of linear TV. 'Cause it's, unless Netflix just starts throwing random weather forecasts.
Well, David Lynch has been doing the weather.
Those were brilliant. Those were so brilliant. I still don't quite know why they were brilliant, but they were.
Hello, today the weather is raining, 32 degrees. That's all.
Everybody, have a great day. Why were they good? I still don't know, but I watched them every day during fucking lockdown.
So we're talking about last week's episode compared to this week's episode. As soon as we realise we've got a different time stream and another Red Dwarf, instead of what happens where they quite succinctly, they're just generally talking to the crew of Red Dwarf last week. This one, Crichton, has some sort of epiphany that's like, we've got to close comms. We've got to close comms. We can't talk to anyone.
Yes, you're right. Yes, you're right.
Where's that come from?
I hadn't even thought about it, but it is a weird one. And again, I don't remember all of these contradictions, particularly in Series 6, but it is pretty crappy for it now that we've looked at it through a researchy, podcasty lens.
I find it really interesting that it's back-to-back episodes as well. That, oh, I'm sorry about this. And because literally in the last episode, like, oh, you don't want to know what happened to Rimmer, or to Lister, which we talked about last week, about that particular moment. But in this one, Crichton's literally trying to shut down all comms.
I mean, last week there is the bit where kind of past Crichton has a go at present Crichton.
Yeah, he has a go, but he's not really.
And
kind
it
of
was
like,
a mistake. It was a mistake, whereas they can actually control the situation a bit better than the last time.
by a thread. I'll give you that.
It is by a thread. We are headcanoning it a little.
Yep. So Crichton decides that he's going to talk to them. Now, this for me is the birth of Series 7 Crichton. The way he starts to act, like almost like an early stage of jealous Crichton in Series 7.
Right.
Just the way he starts
Definitely.
to act. He sees that everything comes out of the Outer Starbug and then starts to go around the table. He's got that kind of emotional aspect to him. So it definitely feels to me that this is like a proto Crichton Series 7-ish thing going on. Or at least Robert Llewellyn finding that voice because that voice becomes very, very prominent. Some people hate it. I think it's brilliant, but some people hate Series 7.
That's a highlight of Series 7 is basically the development of the neuroticism of Crichton. I think it's great.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I do. I'm glad we're on the same page there. So that's a proto.
I like Series 7 a lot more than its rep, actually.
It'd be interesting to see how we go. But what do you make to Crichton's, the way this is developed? Because this part of the episode kind of goes down the route of we don't know as an audience what's happened either. So we're finding out as things go on. So we're reacting to Crichton in this way because we're not privy to his information either. How do you think that went down?
He mentions that all 4 members of Red Dwarf coming on
when they go in the kitchen, because Lister's a bit worried, isn't he?
Yeah. He goes, all 4 members of the crew are coming on. And he's like,
but there's something else. Yeah, one of your members is label is Mr. Lister kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, he's Mr. Lister. Yeah. And he goes, yeah, so it's interesting, particularly if you remember the end of last week, and it's like, oh, whatever happened to Lister's happening. Yeah. So it's, the suspense is building, I think, and it works well. I just think it happens a bit too late in the episode, but I think that's kind of like laying the kind of suspense of what's actually happened to him. I think that's done quite well. But I think particularly when with Crichton acting the way he is as well.
Yeah, it's lines like the oh, what a senseless waste. You know, it's stuff like that. It's like what, because it makes you go, what is happening here? What's occurring? You know, it's what's occurring kind of mode.
I think there's a similar empathy to slapstick here, in as much as everybody knows that when you've been cracked across the head, it fucking hurts, but you still laugh at it when it happens to other people. And everyone has been in the situation where they don't know as much about something as their friends, and their friends are withholding the information from them. And that empathy makes it more funny, even though you know it's a shitty situation to be in. It's like I say, it's a similar thing to slapstick, I think.
Yeah, because it goes through a mode, doesn't it? Because he goes through grief. And then he starts he starts saying, you know, what I say to say is he's quite agitated by it. You know, things like, you know, when he's howling, you know, he says that whole senseless waste. There's been 15 years, the gap. So we need to ascertain that. That we then get to like the commiseration kind of grief moments where he's going, Lister's favourite bowl is little cup. So it goes through.
I love that.
Yeah.
I always remember that bit.
So you've got like the can opener with to pick his ears with, and then we get to the onion scene. It's a nice joke, but I don't think it's not the best joke in the world. And then you get, as you say, Matt, the bit with basically saying that all 4 members are on board, and that's when we come back to the observation lounge. And we start to see the alternative 15 years hence characters. We've got some interesting things here. You know, we've got Cat a lot older. We've got Lister in a jar. We've got Crichton with the toupee. And we've got a hologram, which last episode was 600 years old and was exactly the same. And we've got a hologram now wearing a yellow uniform. Quite smart yellow uniform, but he's quite fat. Matt, what do you think to this then?
Considering what you've just done the week before, the continuity, when you think about it, doesn't make sense. I mean, it's a great physical gag to see these characters age 15 years, even though I was thinking about it, 15 years from when this aired was before Back to Earth.
That's true.
Yeah, and they look nothing like that. Yeah, if anything, Darren John Jules has probably got younger in the 15 years. But yeah, I feel bad for being annoyed about it, but it did annoy me. I
think the Rimmer thing has always bugged me a little bit, if I'm being honest. And it wasn't necessarily thinking about it in a podcasting world. It was more a case of just the whole hologram idea. It's the same way in which in Star Trek Picard, the data thing really annoyed me because there's actually been people that have fixed data online better than the TV show did. They've actually like redid the effects to make data look like data from from the 90s TV show. And that frustrates me a little bit. And I know that obviously the newest version of Star Trek Picard has got a character in it who obviously is ageless, but they can get away with that. And I know the way they're going to get away with that. So it's because the playful attitude of the character. So the character's just going to go, "Hey, look, you're older. I'm going to be older," kind of thing. And I can use that. And obviously Brent Spiner as an actor, you can use him in different ways. But in that sense, Rimmer, as you say, is indestructible. He's got the hard light drive now. And it's always bugged me a little bit that he has changed that way, because you wouldn't do that to yourself if you were a hologram.
So the thing is, I'm not as bothered as you two, because it is a very, very funny visual gag. And I do tend to be pissed off by continuity errors. But there is a serious issue across telly of all time with characters that are supposed to be ageless. The perfect example to me is Angel in Buffy.
I thought you were going to say the face of Bo then.
Also the face of Bo, fuck's sake. But Angel in Buffy, when they cast David Boreanaz, he was, 20, 22, and he was such a baby face. But by the time 3 years later, he's put on a lot of weight. I'm not being rude about the man, but he has. And he looks completely different by the end of Angel compared to what he did when he was cast in Buffy. You've just got to give it a bit of a...
Yeah, I know,
really.
But there's a difference between that and what we're saying about Rimmer.
Yeah, I agree.
You're
right.
I'm saying and my point on data was, don't do it if you can't do it well, and it's for a particular purpose. Now, the Angel thing I get, because he's a young actor and he's built into himself because he becomes a lot bigger of a man, a lot more hunky of a man. You know what I mean? He's a lot stronger and whatever. So I can get away with that.
I prefer older David Boreanaz to skinny kid David Boreanaz. He's much more attractive in bones than he ever was in fucking Buffy. But that's not the point. He ages quite clearly.
Yeah.
So that I'm not that bothered about. And the data thing just annoyed me because people who are not like professionals, or they may have been professional, I don't know, but have managed to do the CGI a lot better than the people with the money.
That is peculiar.
You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, I get why you did it. And I can just about get over it, because it is kind of like, all right, we're just going to go with the theme of what those two talk about. In this, as I say, I'm labouring the point a little bit here, but in this, it's specifically designed that way, and that's where I feel a bit like, I don't particularly like that.
It's a visual gag that gets a reaction from the studio audience. But you're right. It is another classic case of Series 6 not really giving a shit anymore when it comes to the consistency of their lore.
I can kind of almost forgive it season upon season, like if it was something that was established in Series 1.
Yeah.
Going through that. But as Mark said, it is literally the same episode at times.
Yes.
Where they do anything, where they kind of contradict themselves. And to be fair, it's a great gag, and the cast look like they're having a whale of a time actually wearing like the fat suits. And Danny John Jules, I think Danny John Jules, as much as he seems to play the cat and how cool he is, seems to enjoy a bit too much when he gets to play the dorky or as old cat. He's enjoying himself a bit too much, walking around with like a beer belly, and like.
I mean, it's pretty well documented that he always wanted a little bit more to, forgive the pun, get his teeth into with the character of the cat.
Yeah.
And I think something like this, he absolutely relished. You're right.
It's great.
The way that he does the comb over is beautiful.
Who'd have a comb over?
Who would? Yeah. I mean, it was bad enough having just little, like tufts of like hair before I went for the lot. Yeah. I mean, we're actually with somebody with hair this week.
I know, right? The only member of the Shipwrecked and Comatose lot that's actually got a proper barnet.
Well, to say that, I've got a massive bald spot there. But,
You've got a Prince William.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Good grief.
yeah, but to be fair, if I'm going the same way as my dad's, I'll have this bit until at least 65.
Huh.
Nice.
I am starting to grey already, so.
Talking about Star Trek little digs, I also think Crichton is a bit of a dig at Star Trek as well, because the way he's like incognito, he's wearing the fake brows and stuff like that, because he still clearly looks like Crichton.
Yeah.
And they've just stuck some eyebrows on him, and they've stuck the toupee with his blue suit. But I do think it is a little bit of a Star Trek dig. That the fact it is just the way he says, I have to go in incognito. It's like, yeah, that's a Star Trek dig for me. But it is good. It's marvellous to see him in those slacks and no shoes, man. I mean, just, I need a pair. I need a pair now.
I would totally wear those shoes. Not quite as good as the cat's Cuban heels, but what is?
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah. We finally get to the audience obviously know what's going on. We now need to get Lister, Rimmer, and the cat up to speed. The way they do this, I think, is brilliant as well. Just the way that Lister has to react. It's just like, oh dear. And there's the. It's just because it's like it's descriptive, because we've actually seen the stuff, and obviously with Rimmer as well, when Rimmer comes on and talks about the loss of weight and things like that. I think that those two scenes, the juxtaposition of the two scenes, actually work really well in tandem.
Mm.
So the brain in the jar, right? I love the attention to detail that it's still got the fucking dreads. That was so funny and so clever. So good. They didn't need to do that. They didn't. But the fact that they did was very, very funny.
I do like Chris Barry's reading of him looking through the going, oh dear. And then it's like his sheer glee.
Yeah.
And the sheer glee he has and stuff like, oh dear, oh dear. What? Is he fat? Is he old?
Far from it. He's actually lost a bit of weight.
No, wait.
It's very, very well done.
But I do quite like, I think Craig Charles does the kind of like grief-stricken shock quite well.
Yeah.
He's there. And you do kind of feel for Lister and going like, how the hell he...
That's old school Red Dwarf, isn't it? That Rimmer and Lister
Yes.
thing is very old school Red Dwarf.
Yeah, that's like series 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actively winding each other up with nothing other than their own kind of malice to get some satisfaction out of getting a reaction to each other really is very old school Red Dwarf. Hadn't thought about it, but now you said it, you bang on.
It's the balance, isn't it? Because you've got, like, from Lister being up here, he falls from grace because he obviously sees what happened to him. And Rimmer then takes the opportunity to, like, right, I'm gonna go for this now. So yeah, it does feel that old school way. I mean, you could park a plane in that crease. We still haven't seen the butt though, have we?
Yeah.
We still haven't seen the butt that could park that plane. Yeah, and just the self. But back in the dining area.
That reminded me of scum as well.
So back in the dining area, we kind of get this discussion about the Habsburgs, the Borgias, the Louis XVI, and then ultimately Hitler. So Hitler gets brought into this conversation. Okay, I don't know how to best approach this really, because, all right, Matt, take it away. What do you think? The concept of this is that they've kind of lost themselves in what they're doing, in the challenges that they've got. They've completely lost any form of self whatsoever. They've been taken away, been swayed away by this method of going round and meeting the Goerings and all that type of thing. So what do you make to it?
Before we do that, I need to point out Mike Harper, Red Dwarf, that, and I've used this line reading a couple of times, and I love Crichton's reading of Hermann Goering is a bit dodgy. And I'm like, I've used a bit dodgy a bit too many times, I think. But yeah, I just need to call that because I love Robert Llewellyn's reading of that line. So in terms of the kind of fall from grace, the fall from grace and the kind of materialistic attitudes the crew've got. And when you was asking me that question, I only just realised that I think if Lister had not become brain in a jar, I think because it's never revealed when or how he became brain in a jar, so you don't know whether it happened after all this or whether it happened before all this. I think it might have happened before because Lister's always been kind of almost the moral centre of the crew, and Crichton sometimes, but Crichton always ends up having his morals kind of directed with whoever
and stuff,
so corrupted him. So I can buy Crichton going into that. The cat is quite superficial and perhaps doesn't have an understanding of a lot of human history anyway. And Rimmer, Rimmer has like got autographs of Napoleon. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, so I would totally believe that Rimmer, younger Rimmer, perhaps not accepting of Hitler's views, would still probably want to ask him about his economic policy because I mean, the guy's like, yes, you've killed 68 million people, but you still did. I can see Rimmer saying that to him, saying that, okay, yeah, you did all that stuff, but I want to know about your economic policy or something like that. I can see that. Lister's the one that I would see would actually oppose everything that they would be doing. So him becoming a brain in the jar is probably the only way that I could see him getting involved, because then a lot of him's gone and he's probably end up being quite depressed and probably fallen into this kind of thing that if he, as we said, we see, because it's Lister that leads the charge to get him off the ship, saying that we don't want to be like you. And I think the only reason that Lister would agree to do that is if him, as he is now, was basically taken away and he's basically reliant on these three to do whatever. And I think he's just been accepted of that. I could buy I could buy it happening, particularly when you've got Rimmer, because I think without Lister as he is, Rimmer could easily take the power dynamic and they follow him, even if Cat doesn't like, even if the Cat is antagonistic, as they start to have this lifestyle change.
Yeah,
Crichton is someone who always gets assimilated by the environment he is anyway, will just suddenly start to learn that this is the best life he can do. And because Lister isn't Lister anymore, they lose that moral centre. I could probably see a discussion between Grant and Naylor trying to figure out how they could get around this idea without Lister. So that's probably why he's in that brain in the jar.
Yeah, no, that's a good reading on that, and it's good that you came up with it.
I like that as well. I think we covered this a little in Back to Reality when we talked about Sebastian Doyle.
Mm-hmm.
And again, a line that I'm going to quote from a reasonably obscure but fantastically wonderful track is called The Right Decision by Jesus Jones. I quoted this again in Back to Reality when we looked at that. The problem with success is you become what you detest. That is something that has resonated with me for my entire life since I heard that record. And I keep seeing it in different things. And I've seen it twice in Red Dwarf now. And it's just so succinct and so true. And it's a contradiction of modern life. I am like Lister. I'm a very morally led human being. But deep down, I'd fucking love some money. I'd really fucking love to have loads of money and be able to spend it on shiny shit, which is a complete contradiction to how my moral code actually works. And I love that Red Dwarf has been able to do this in two completely different ways. And each time made me think, shit, the problem with success is you become what you detest. And I'd also like to point out that if I met 15 years in the future Nazi me, that would be the only me I wouldn't fuck.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, ever so slightly different tact. You know, I think also as well that you've got to remember that Lister was the last human alive, or we understand to be alive, and the idea that they've gone from abject poverty to up there, and I don't mean poverty even money wise. I'm talking in general as life in itself. That they're aimlessly in space, derelicts around everywhere. You've got simulants and gelfs, and that's about all you can basically muster, with the odd polymorph in there. And you then get turned around, and you can end up going anywhere, anywhen, and and that kind of like facilitates all of this. So I think the general concept is good. I think it's the idea that you've got this kind of like from where you were to begin with to where they end up. The only slight issue with that is that you can go anywhere and anywhen. So the journey from that to almost like, as you were saying about almost like the comfort zone of like living a normal, happy life, when you can do anything you want, how quickly that would like disperse into what they become. And that in itself is something that you could write a book on, and that would be really interesting.
Honestly, it's genuinely one of my greatest fears that I want more affluency in my life. I want a big house. I want a fucking library in my own home. I want a cattery. There's lots of things that I aspire to own, and it needs money. But one of my greatest fears is it will make me become a right-wing shit.
I think what happens is you start having money and you realise, shit, the tax bracket's hit you.
I don't think I ever need to worry about it anyway, though, thinking about it.
My national insurance number's going up. Well, it's shortly, isn't it? So national insurance is going up soon. That'll be fun. Did I or did I not? I'm just about to look at the script, but I've put on my note that the word prig is used instead of prick.
Well, a prig is a separate word in itself. It means someone who's a little bit kind of snooty and...
Is it? Oh, okay. That's the uneducatedness in me. Okay, I've learned something today. South Park, I have learned something today. Okay.
You did a learn.
I did a learn. Okay, so the bazookoids all of a sudden become powerful again. How many times have they blasted through that door?
You are obsessed with the fucking bazookoids.
Well, Matt, what do you think to the bazookoids? Because they're either really powerful or fucking shit.
I'm more concerned about the weird editing of the shot. There's a kind of weird thing where, like, the timing doesn't match up. Where, like, I can't remember exactly. I just got the weird editing of bazookoid shot in my notes. It's one of those things they're only as powerful as the plot needs them to be. It's the sonic screwdriver of the Red Dwarf world.
But like I said on the polymorph one, they shoot a chain and nothing happens to the chain. It's a bazookoid. I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this. But then they can shoot a door and get through a door because Ace Rimmer's about to kill Dwayne Dibley. And then on this one, they shoot the same, well, I'm assuming the same door to get through to see the older versions of them. And it works absolutely fine. So, yeah, just...
Right. I've got a theory.
All right.
It's a demon.
Not that it could be bunnies.
I love the fact that both of me and Mark's on the same wavelength.
Well, we've talked about Buffy earlier today, haven't we?
Down. That, by the way, the Buffy soundtrack is brilliant.
Yes, it is. The phasers in Star Trek have different settings.
They have a stun setting, yes.
Have the bazookoids got different settings?
But they don't change the setting and they're trying to kill the polymorph.
I didn't say it was a good theory.
It would work for the door. It would work for the door if you change the setting to like blast open the door. I do get that. During that scene, the word "you are destined to become us" is used. Now, we briefly mentioned this last episode. Destined to become them. Some theories out there say that because they're in a paradox, that this is actually creating a different timeline because of the paradox itself has actually physically done it. So it's a bit Doctor Who timey-wimey, get out of this.
Wibbly-wobbly
thing. To be fair, I'm not that bothered about it, if I'm being honest. I'm less bothered about that than I am with Rimmer. So I don't know what you think with the whole timey-wimey stuff.
I think at this stage, 1993, Wibbly Wobbly Timey Wimey was less established, less recognized, and less everyone shrugs their shoulders as long as there's a good plot. So maybe people would have picked it apart. Whereas I think if this was more recent, people have just done what I said, shrug their shoulders, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I think it doesn't bother me as much now as it did at the time. But I'm finding other stuff that I'm now bothered about.
Yeah.
Picking apart something that's 30 years old for no good fucking reason.
You do get quite a lot of the, like Star Trek does it a little bit. Obviously Lost did it, what happened happens. I think there's another TV show which I saw recently, which was like what happened happens. It's that thing of like, and then you've got the Avengers doing their own thing, and so there's various different versions of it, and as I say, for me, it doesn't really make that much difference. It's not really affecting me in any way. But then, yeah, so that's a destined to become a bit, and we get to the bit where we get the final scene, which is basically, it's kind of like the what I said earlier in the episode was, it doesn't really build to anything with regards to the time drive, but this kind of becomes like the big battle scene, doesn't it? Effectively, it's like the two are facing off against each other, but you're going to kill us, that's going to cause this, that's going to cause that. How do you think? How would you take this final act, Matt?
I mean, I was watching it, and he kind of, for some reason, kind of reminded me of Blackadder at one point.
Okay.
Yeah, like Blackadder goes fourth at one point, where there's a weird finality to it, but it's building up like the kind of cliffhanger again. The end, like it's supposed to be the end of season 6. They're kind of trying to have some kind of dramatic climax to the series, and then suddenly they kill Lister, they kill the cat, they kill Cryan, and then at that point you're thinking, oh my god, how are they going to get out of this? And tension's there and stuff, but you're thinking, oh yeah, they're not going to leave them dead, are they? And then it leads to River to save the day, so to speak. But but I think it's a key moment in terms of Rimmer's character as well, in that if you go back to him kind of saying that he hates everyone, at the start, okay, yeah, it probably does serve as a decent bookend for this bit, but it has quite a very good image to end the series on. So he builds up to the fact that you've got Rimmer, who we know is probably very much of Kelly. Last week we saw him basically not fire a bazookoid at a simulant, but now simulant to save everyone. But he's now running down, grabbing bazookoid, running down there to save the day, more or less, and doing something brave for the first time in his life. So in that point, it's quite an effective visual shot to end on.
I think it is just fucking superb, but not as a comedy, but as a drama.
Mm-hmm.
The genuine shivers down my spine when Rimmer goes, then I say, fight. The real kind of character development of Rimmer that you're talking about too, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
But that line and the music is wonderful. The acting is... Yeah, the acting is absolutely on point. They are drama actors in this scene. They're not comedy actors. And the concept is great as well. The fact that you can be someone, let's say like me, if I met Nazi me in the future because I got too much money, I fucking hate him and I'd want to kill him. And everything about this isn't what I'd have expected from Red Dwarf, but I love it. And it always resonated with me as you've had 6 episodes of the lulls, followed by this piece with the cliffhanger, and it just works, and it shouldn't, and it's great. And then it's ruined by, it's cold outside, can you bet me? They should have come up with something else instead of that as a more dramatic way of ending the series.
I don't know. I always quite like the da 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 da. It's like a kind of different version to the EastEnders. Do 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 do. So quite I quite like that.
Maybe going back to the season 1. Dun, 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 dun,
Exactly.
dun.
Or silence. Silence would have been fucking perfect. You know, they've done that in other shows where a character has died and it's been so effective.
24 used to do it a lot, and it was effective in 24. They used to do that really well.
Yeah, 24 did it.
Yeah, there's a whole like 3-hour conversation about how much I dislike that, but that's for another non-existent podcast.
Dislike 24, dislike 24's editing of that when there was a death scene.
Yeah. There's
That doesn't answer my question. 24 as a TV series, or 24 when they did a silence when someone dies.
The silence. 24 is one of my favorite TV shows of all time. But I've got issues with that silence because the fan base.
I'm flabbergasted. That's wonderful.
Yeah, because like the fucking internet, right? Was saying, oh no, he's not dead. He's not dead. It's because there's no silence, no silent clock or whatever, and like they forgot, and that's why That's why Tony Almeida would not just fucking die and not come back.
Oh, get in the sea. Every time Tony Almeida comes back, I get a fucking half chub. He's so fit, so I don't want him dead.
I'll go and watch him in another TV series then.
He's so pretty.
Welcome to the Tony Almeida podcast.
Oh, he's beautiful. Oh, Tony Almeida.
What's she called? Who was the woman, Jack Bauer?
Chloe?
No. Renee Walker.
She's attractive.
Yes. She's now the new Borg queen.
Is she?
Yep.
Anyway, yeah, the whole scene just works when it really fucking shouldn't, I think was my point, after we got distracted.
The only thing that always kind of niggles me is that I always feel that Chris Barry is on the verge of bursting out laughing. So when he goes, there may be a way out of this bit. There's part of me that always feels like he's about to just laugh at himself trying to be dramatic. And that's
Really?
I don't know. Yeah, that's always niggled me a bit.
I don't get that. Is it because there's a smeg up where he does laugh that you've got that in your head? Because, like I say, the acting for me really worked. He looks scared as shit.
The smeg up for me, and again probably spoils it a little bit, is the fact that he walks through the door with a bazooka.
That's the bit that's the one I remember.
Just smashes into the door, and you just see all the background like crew just laughing their ass off on it because it is really funny.
He shakes the whole set, doesn't he? But no, there's just something about that. I don't know. It feels like he's about to laugh at himself. I don't know. There's just always something about that.
But fair enough.
There's elements. I mean, this will be discussed in future episodes about a potential Red Dwarf film, and I won't spoil too much, Mark, about it. But effectively, they use a lot of elements of some of future series which they had ideas for the film. It's telling that, as we mentioned before, about you've got Doug Naylor actually kind of. He seems to like the dramatic stuff a little bit more. So we do get to see a lot of stuff in 7 where you do get moments like with when even like sort of the scenes where you get Kachansky in the duckworks, you know, with Lister, and they have that conversation. You get a lot more of that, like, so they get moments to pause or moments to like sort of sit back and listen to the story a bit more, like some of the earlier scenes in 1 and 2. But it does feel to me like this is almost like the premise where, not necessarily because of the books, but this is where you think they might have started to think about ideas for a film, or or do something along those lines, because it does feel, as I say, the dramatic aspects changed here. We come to the end, which is to be continued. Now, that wasn't originally the plan, and we've also got the scene with the urine recycle, which was mentioned at the very top of this hour. So there's and then we've got Into the Gloop as well, which is obviously a new kind of faction. It could spin off into all kinds of things with Into the Gloop. Having the actual ending the way that it's actually in the next episode is how they imagined it originally, and then you've got the urine recycle one and the way they ended it, and you talk about the Blackadder aspect of it. I think they fell onto the right thing to do it this way. But obviously they weren't even anticipating the 3 years, the gap that's going to be in between here. So I think it's really effective. The urine rights, I mean, don't get me wrong, it might be us just looking back at it, but when you see that cut scene, it's like, it just wouldn't have landed right. It felt like it needed, like we were talking before with how it ends, it needed that. It needs to have that kind of not go back, and it's almost what you're saying, Mark, with the credits. It didn't need to go back there, and it didn't, which was probably in hindsight good.
We need to remember this conversation when we get to Only the Good. Just saying, because I ended up watching the alternative ending of that today as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's on YouTube, isn't it?
Yeah. But there's a very similar thing with that in terms of, I think the impact of the dramatic cliffhanger. Well, Only the Good ends with a joke, but it's still surrounding a dramatic cliffhanger, whereas this doesn't have that kind of last punchline.
I mean, Adagio for Strings is a great tune. To end on Adagio for Strings and then with the joke, slightly different, but
I think the impact is probably better with the cliffhanger, I think, rather than the alternative ending.
Yeah, I'd agree very much so. It's just like I say, the happy, happy, joy, joy theme tune kind of annoyed me. I do think that they probably wouldn't have done it had they known there was going to be the hiatus. And like I said at the start, I was mortified like a year later that in my head, because there was less way to research what was going on with the TV show at the time, I thought Red Dwarf had ended on a cliffhanger, and that fucking sucked. Or it had ended with a really, really sad fucking ending where they die. And neither of those things are really what you'd want after 6 series of investment.
It did say to be continued, though.
True, but at the time I just thought there was going to be no more because there was such a long wait.
Being cancelled, or But
that alternative ending, wasn't it? Correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't it included in the second Smeg Ups video, Smeg Outs? Is that right?
It might have been, yeah.
I haven't watched it again recently. I didn't think to watch it for this episode, so I think maybe we should have a bit of a deeper dive into it when we look at the Smeg Outs. Absolutely.
Yeah, Smeg Out is on the agenda, so
it is
good. We're good to review that. So any final thoughts on this episode then?
I thought it was brilliant. I can't get my head around why Matt thinks it's cack. I thought it was brilliant.
I don't think it's cack. I mean, cause there's a lot of good jokes and a good series in that. I just think that structurally it's cack. But it's basically it's a load of diamonds in not a turd. It's a load of diamonds in licorice all sorts, because licorice all sorts, I don't like them. So
no, I don't like licorice all sorts. A nice metaphor.
Yeah, it's chocolate muffins embedded in licorice all sorts. Yeah, that's it. So you got like all these like clumps of goodness, like in a kind of thing that really shouldn't exist.
I would agree with that, but I'm less bothered by it.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think the show's shown it's more capable of doing a lot better than this, I think.
You're not as cross as I am, though, about the utter bollocks that is the ignoring this whole episode at the start of Tika to Ride, though, are you?
No, I can't remember last time. No, actually, no, I watched Tika to Ride last year.
They kind of did the Star Wars crawl thing within 3, don't they? The Lister comes on screen and explains stuff away, and then they kind of continue on.
No, it's not that I'm bothered about. It's just the fucking... They can travel in time and space without any explanation whatsoever, having been a major plot point of this episode that you can't travel in space.
How did their future selves travel through space?
Yes. But they never became them.
Yeah, but
we don't know how they got it. Yeah, but we don't know how they got it because they blew up and they never existed.
Yeah, but
and
they
wibbly
did.
Wobbly, timey wimey.
They did though. Maybe they just found the setting which says, "Oh, you can travel in space as well."
Maybe they just found the setting. All it needed was a line. If that was the case,
I haven't watched Tika to Ride for a long time, so I'm gonna reserve judgment. All I can remember is Lister on the TV screen a la Crichton in the Smeg-Ups, talking as a talking head, talking his way out of it, and then doing the very thing that we mentioned here, the Star Trek thing of ending up in Dallas in 1963. So, we will get there. And also, by the way, we may be losing somebody in the Red Dwarf crew, but we're gaining Ed Bye back next series.
True.
So that'll be interesting to go through that. So if that's everything for tonight, it is 5 to midnight at time of recording. So, it's time to go to bed. I've got to go to work again tomorrow. Hello,
I'm going to wake up at 6.
I will be waking up at 11, like I usually do, because my body clock is very different to yours. This is kind of early for me.
It's kind of early for me, but it's hard work when you get into work. You get home from work at 7:45 and on call at 8 o'clock. So, that's not great. And I'm back at work in 7 hours. But
you should probably wind it up then, Kurt. You should probably
wind
not get distracted by me saying that you should probably wind it
I do
up.
fancy going to get some poppadoms, but that's for another time. While we wrap this up, Matt, where can people find you online?
They can find me on the internet. They can find me at xandmatt on Twitter. If they want to find me personally, if they want to find my podcast, Pick a Disc, where I speak to someone about an album that they want to talk about for whatever reason, they can find me on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter under Pick a Disc. And you can also hear me on the new No Book Club, a Yellow Jackets podcast with Mr. Kurt North and some other bloke talking about the TV show Yellow Jackets. Yellow Jacket Pod. And you can find us on Instagram. We're on Instagram as No Book Club Pod.
Why didn't you have them both as the same?
Because someone else took the handle on Instagram.
Bastard. Do you know what? I fucking hate Instagram. It's like Twitter on hard mode.
Instagram is much better than Twitter.
Ugh.
That's such a Gen X way of thinking about it, Mark.
I am Gen X.
I know.
I've only got one gag. Piss off.
I would sleep with myself. Tick.
I wouldn't sleep with Nazi me, though. We've established that. Nazi me can fuck off.
Yes, but Mark, what if Nazi Mark was also very physically fit? As in,
I still wouldn't sleep with him because he's a bellend. I've got standards.
What about a bellend with a really nice butt?
I mean, I have brought pleasure to the world because I have such a beautiful ass. And I would bring pleasure to my world by bringing my beautiful ass, but not Nazi Mark. No, never Nazi Mark. At Mark Adams HC on both Instagram and Twitter. Probably check me out on Twitter because I don't bother with Instagram. You can also follow my podcasts. I've got 3 on the go at the moment. I've got Geek Polymath, which is a monthly show about me not really being obsessive about any geekiness and finding someone who is and having a nice chat about that at Geek Polymath on Twitter. I also do a monthly show about kids' TV, Right in the Childhood. That's at RITC Pod on Twitter. And finally, I am also on Chucky Vision, which is a podcast about the Chucky franchise at Chucky Vision on Twitter. You can also occasionally find me talking about the shit films pre-MCU on Podcast 616 as well. That's the Marvel show that we've got on our network.
Okay, so you can find me on Twitter at rmuldrick. It's RMULDRAKE. Also on the X-Files podcast, the Xcast, and you can find that on Twitter at the X_cast. That is on Instagram as well, but I don't know what the handle is because I'm never on that. And the Star Trek Picard podcast, Make It So, where you can find that on Twitter at Jean-Luc Podard. Something that we don't really mention on this podcast, but you can find all of the We Made This Podcast Network's shows on WeMadeThisNetwork.com. So that's where you can find all of the types of podcasts that we've got on the network, and there'll be some stuff.
There's lots of good stuff, actually. I listen to most of the podcasts on our network. There's some fun stuff, and we do occasionally pop up on other people's shows as well. The 3 of us, well, the 5 of us do, actually.
Exactly. So check that out. So there's plenty of podcasts on the network. There'll be some at the end of this on the clips as well, to have a listen to see what type of things are actually happening on the network over the last few weeks. And finally, this is the final episode of Series 6. We do need to mention about Laredo. the Western Town thing.
Yes.
So anybody who has seen and heard us talk about it, every single episode for this series, that there was the fire at the in the end of November 2021, and which was the filming site for the Gunmen of the Apocalypse, and they're trying to raise money to rebuild that Western Town. Anyone who can spare some cash, please do so. They've got a GoFundMe page, which we'll provide links to in the notes. And please give what you can to try and get that back up and running as quickly as possible. I think they were at 15,500 last time I saw, and they're trying to raise 25 grand. So if you can.
Hopefully it'll be a lot more than that by this point. Let's get them right to the end. Let's get them that amount that they're looking for to get it fully rebuilt. Hopefully it'll be a bit more than what we've got at the moment. We're recording this tail end of January, so hopefully it'll be a bit better. And if you've got a few quid, please do chuck it that way, because Gunmen of the Apocalypse is the best fucking episode.
Yes. Bar none.
Bar none.
Yeah, so until next time then, thank you everyone for listening. This has been our Series 6 coverage. We have had a fantastic time going through these 6 episodes. We'll be back with potentially some specials, and Series 7 will be quicker than between Series 5 and Series 6. We can guarantee that. So yes.
Whoa. Guarantee is a strong word.
Guarantee it. I will guarantee it. We will work out how many days. There was quite a lot of days. Even if it's by
quite
a day,
lot of specials.
quite a lot of specials. So that leaves us to say thank you very much, and until next time, remember,
we're unforgettable.
I forgotten a double quote from the episode.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This Podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at wemadethispod.
Hello everyone, this is Tony, Network Chief of We Made This. As you know, our podcast network brings together a brilliant assortment of talent who talk about all kinds of pop culture content, such as the episode you've just listened to. We're not going anywhere, but we'd love to keep the lights on for even longer if you're able to support our network on Patreon. For just £2 a month, you get your name in lights and the satisfaction of knowing you're helping us produce more great audio. And for £3 a month, you'll get your name in lights, but you'll also get access to an exclusive bi-monthly podcast from the We Made This talent pool on podcasting, pop culture, and, well, you tell us. We'll take your suggestions. For less than the price of a coffee per month, you can help keep We Made This going. Just head to patreon.com/We Made This. That's patreon.com/We Made This. And get the ball rolling.
Elsewhere on We Made This.
Frame to frame.
For Sean's benefit, these are all ex-players. Just so you know, mate.
Yes,
they all
these
used
are
to be NBA players.
If you don't know who Shaquille O'Neal is, there's a problem. You don't
Can
know
I
who
get
Shaq
right?
is?
Okay, let me just announce that right then. There's a problem because just to put my cards on the table, I did not know that these were real basketball players until halfway through the movie, and then the joke only hit me halfway through. I was like, oh, now I understand where the gag's coming from, because I thought
You've never heard of Shaquille O'Neal?
I mean, I've heard of him, but I didn't know that was him. So it's probably not really much of an answer, is it? Really, it's pretty lame.
Chucky Vision, a Chucky podcast.
This was their first film as Full Moon. Before that, they were Empire Pictures for a while, and they did a few movies, produced a few movies. This was the first big hit for Full Moon. I think it was just this film for 89, and then in 90 they produced like 3 films, and then in 91 they produced like 5 films, and then in 92 they were producing like 10 films, all in 1 year.
Yeah, that's a lot.
They exploded during the early 90s, and they've still been kind of like that today. Like, announced in like 2019, and then it was done during 2020. They announced the Deadly 10. These 10 movies they were going to produce and create in 1 year. and they were going to live stream all the behind the scenes and stuff. Sadly, they only made like 2 of those films because then Corona hit, so like they couldn't actually push out as much as they used to. That's kind of their spirit, kind of this independent spirit. You know, Troma does it as well, a weird mix between quality and quantity.
Academy Watch, a prestige film podcast.
Every other discipline in film comes from somewhere else. Acting comes from theatre, writing comes from writing, you know, like music comes from music, like everything comes from somewhere else except editing. Editing is the one thing that is intrinsically filmic about film, and to not show that is just a hilarious disrespect to
it's completely insane. That's the one I mean, don't get me wrong, I hate it. I hate cutting any of them, but I can kind of squint and sort of kind of see if you've got to pick ones to eliminate, like eliminating some of these technical ones. And I mean, score seems like a bridge too far to me, but you know, fine. But like you said, editing is just such an intrinsic part of the art.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.